There's a low vibration before you hear it. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet hum running through the walls like something alive inside the concrete. Then the dishes start to tremble. A glass rattles against the sink. And right through the middle of a residential building, a 300-ton train slides past the kitchen window like it belongs there. No warning, no pause, just steel moving through someone's living space. Chongqing doesn't sit on flat land. It clings to it. Mountains rise where streets should be. Rivers carve through neighborhoods like they're in a hurry to escape. Try to imagine taking a city like Pittsburgh, stacking it on top of San Francisco, and then telling engineers they still need to build a functioning metro system through it. That's what they were dealing with. There's a moment when you're standing on one of those narrow roads where you realize the ground beneath you isn't really ground. It's layers. Roads above roads. Bridges crossing other bridges. Buildings anchored into hillsides that don't look stable enough to hold a sidewalk, let alone a city. So when the planners tried to map out a train line, the mountain pushed back. Every direction they tested hit the same wall. Too steep, too unstable, too expensive, too dangerous. And eventually the only path left was straight through. Not around the building, not under it, through it. What makes it stranger is how normal it feels once you accept it. People cook dinner while trains pass by their windows. Kids do homework with that same low vibration humming through the walls. It becomes background noise, just another part of daily life. I remember thinking this is what adaptation really looks like. Not clean, not perfect, just necessary. But then you leave the city, and somehow it gets worse. Mount Hua doesn't announce itself with noise. It doesn't vibrate. It doesn't warn you. It just stands there, quiet, sharp, unmoving, like it's been waiting for you to make a mistake. The path starts off like any other mountain trail. Stone steps, a few railings, nothing that would make you turn around. But then the air changes. The wind feels colder, thinner, and the path, it begins to disappear. At some point, you stop walking on a trail, and you start holding on to your life. There's a section they call the plank walk. But that name doesn't really explain it. It's not a walk. It's a decision. A narrow line of wooden boards bolted into the side of a vertical cliff. Beneath your feet, there's nothing. Just a 2,000-foot drop straight down into silence. No nets, no second chances. Only a set of rusted iron chains hammered into the rock centuries ago. Chains that don't look like they've been replaced. Chains that feel cold and permanent, like they've seen too many hands gripping them in fear. I didn't expect that part to get to me. I've seen heights before. Bridges, skyscrapers, planes. But this was different. Because here there's no barrier between you and gravity. No illusion of safety. Just wood iron and your own grip. You clip into a harness. They make you. And for a second it feels reassuring. But then you look down. And the harness feels symbolic. More psychological than real. Each step is slow. Not because you want it to be. Because your body refuses to move faster. Your hands tighten around the chain without thinking. Your shoulders lock. And somewhere in your chest, There's this quiet voice asking why you're even here. And that's when it hits you. This path wasn't built for tourists. 700 years ago, there were no cameras, no safety harnesses, no lines of people waiting their turn. Just monks, builders, people who believed there was something worth reaching at the top of this mountain. They carved steps into stone. They drove iron into cliffs. They laid down wood where there should have been nothing. Not because it was safe, but because there was no other way. Same as Chongqing. Different setting. Same problem. The mountain said no, and someone answered anyway. I remember stopping halfway across that plank. Not by choice. My legs just paused. I looked out instead of down. The clouds were moving below me, not above. And for a second, everything felt still. Not peaceful, just clear. All those structures back in the city, the train through the building, the stacked roads, the impossible layouts. It wasn't about ambition. It wasn't about showing off. It was survival. You either adapt to the terrain, or you don't live there at all. And standing there holding onto a chain driven into stone by someone who refused to turn back, I realized something I hadn't expected. We like to think we build cities, but most of the time, we're just negotiating with the ground beneath us. It starts with silence, not the kind you get when you turn off the TV or step outside at night. This is different. It presses in on you. No signal, no hum, no distant engine, just the sound of your own breathing, and maybe the wind brushing across the hills. The first thing you notice is your phone. Or rather, what it isn't doing. No bars, no Wi-Fi, no messages trying to sneak through. It just sits there in your pocket like a dead piece of plastic. And after a while, you stop checking it. You forget about it. That's when it hits you. This place wasn't built to connect people. It was built to disconnect them. Somewhere deep in the mountains of Guizhou, hidden between folds of land that feel older than anything man-made. There's a structure so large it doesn't look real at first. It doesn't rise into the sky like a tower. It sinks into the earth. A perfect circle carved into a natural basin stretching half a kilometer across. They call it FAST, the 500-meter aperture spherical telescope. But standing there, it doesn't feel like a machine. It feels like an eye, a massive silent eye pointed straight up at the sky, waiting for something to answer back. The scale is hard to explain until you try to walk it. You start at one edge and think you'll get a better look from the center. 10 minutes pass, then 20. And it still stretches out in front of you, a field of metallic triangles locked together like a giant puzzle. 4,450 panels, each one shaped like a triangle, each one adjustable. Each one part of a surface that has to be almost perfect. Because this thing isn't just sitting there. It moves. Not in a way you can see easily. No spinning, no obvious motion. But underneath those panels, there are thousands of hydraulic actuators. Small mechanical muscles that push and pull adjusting angles by tiny degrees. The surface reshapes itself, depending on where it needs to listen. That's the part people miss. It doesn't look at the stars. It listens to them. Signals traveling for billions of years. Weak, faint, almost nothing by the time they reach Earth. And somehow this structure has to catch them, separate them from everything else. Every phone call, every radio wave, every spark of electricity. which is where the real problem begins. You smell it before you see it. Not smoke exactly, something sharper, dry, like heat itself has a scent. Then the horizon starts to flicker, just a faint orange pulse against the dark, and for a second your brain tells you it has to be a reflection, a trick of distance. But it doesn't fade. The closer you get, the more the air changes, warmer, thicker. And then the ground drops away in front of you, and there it is. A crater, wide and open, like a wound in the earth, filled with fire that doesn't move like normal flames. It breathes, slow, constant, alive in a way that feels wrong. No barriers, no glass, just heat rising straight into the night. They call it the door to hell. But it wasn't supposed to exist. Back in 1971, this wasn't a destination. It was just another drilling site. Soviet engineers searching for natural gas in the middle of a desert that didn't look like it had much to offer. Flat land, dry wind. Nothing that hinted at what was sitting just below the surface. They drilled, and for a while, everything went as planned. Then the ground gave way. The rig collapsed into a cavern they didn't know was there. Not solid rock, but a pocket. A hollow space filled with natural gas under pressure. The kind of thing you don't see until it's too late. The earth opened, swallowed the equipment, and left behind a crater leaking gas into the air. No one expected that part. What came next was a decision. Quick, practical. The kind of decision you make when you think you understand the problem. They lit it. The idea was simple. Burn off the gas, clear the air, let the fire consume whatever was escaping underground. A few days, maybe a couple of weeks, and it would be gone. That's what they thought. 50 years later, it's still burning. Standing at the edge, you can feel the heat on your face, even from a distance. It pushes back at you, like it doesn't want you there. The flames aren't uniform. They don't rise in neat lines. They twist out of cracks in the earth, hundreds of small fires feeding off something deeper, something that hasn't stopped. Temperatures inside the crater can reach around 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to melt rock. And in some places you can see it. The edges look soft, warped, like the ground itself is slowly giving in. I remember picking up a small stone near the rim. It felt normal in my hand. Solid. Real. But looking down into that crater, it was hard to shake the thought that everything around me was temporary. That given enough time, heat would take it all. That's the thing about geological force. It doesn't rush. It doesn't panic. It just continues. The Soviets didn't account for that. They assumed the gas pocket was limited. A contained problem. But what they tapped into wasn't a single chamber. It was part of a much larger system underground. Reservoirs connected in ways they couldn't fully map at the time. So the fire kept feeding. Year after year, decade after decade. At some point, it stopped being a mistake you could fix easily. And that's where things get complicated. You'd think the solution would be obvious. Cut off the oxygen, seal the crater, extinguish the flames. But it's not that simple. This isn't a campfire you can smother. The gas is still coming from below, pressurized, persistent. If you close the surface without controlling the source, it doesn't disappear. It finds another way out. Maybe somewhere less visible. Maybe somewhere closer to people. That's the risk. Turkmenistan has talked about shutting it down more than once. Officials have made statements. Plans have been discussed. But nothing has happened. Not in a way that changes what you see when you stand there at night. Part of it is technical. Containing a constantly feeding gas source in unstable ground isn't straightforward. You'd need to redirect the flow, manage pressure, and do it without triggering something worse. Part of it is political. The crater became known, photographed, shared. It turned into a strange kind of landmark. Tourists come. Scientists study it. It sits out there in the desert, burning, drawing attention to a place most people would never think about otherwise. Shutting it down means removing something that, despite its origin, now has value. And then there's the question no one seems to answer directly. What if they try and fail? What if sealing it causes a rupture somewhere else? What if the gas builds and escapes in a way that's harder to control? Sometimes leaving a problem where you can see it feels safer than pushing it underground where you can't. I stood there longer than I expected, watching the flames move, listening to the low roar that never quite goes away. It's not loud, but it's constant, like a reminder. This wasn't planned, this wasn't designed. This was a moment. A decision made under pressure, based on what seemed reasonable at the time. And now it's part of the landscape, something that outlived the people who started it. There's a kind of honesty in that. We like to think we're in control, that with enough knowledge, enough tools, we can shape the world the way we want. And most of the time we can. Roads, cities, systems that make life predictable. But every now and then something slips. A miscalculation, a hidden variable, a force that doesn't care about timelines or expectations. And suddenly you're not shaping the world anymore. You're standing at the edge of it, watching it burn, and realizing that some mistakes don't end. They just keep going long after the people who made them are gone. It starts with rain. Heavy, sudden, the kind that soaks through your shirt before you even think about finding cover. You run without really choosing a direction, just trying to get out of it, and then the ground opens in front of you. Not a hole you can step around, something deeper, darker, breathing cold air up from below. That's where he stopped. A local man, a logger, 1991. He wasn't looking for anything, just trying to stay dry. He stood at the edge, felt that rush of air coming out of the earth, and heard something underneath it. Water. Wind. A low roar that didn't belong to the surface. He didn't go in. That's the part I keep thinking about. Most of us would have turned around too. Too dark. Too unknown. No reason to risk it. So he left. And for years, whatever was down there stayed exactly as it was. Hidden. When people finally came back to find it, they didn't discover a cave. They found a world. The entrance isn't dramatic in the way you expect. It doesn't announce itself. You walk through jungle, thick and alive, the kind that clings to your skin with humidity. Everything feels close. Loud. Insects, leaves, the constant movement of life around you. And then the ground dips. You step down, then again. And slowly the noise fades. The air cools. The light changes. Until you reach a point where the outside world feels like something you already left behind. I remember that first moment inside. It didn't feel like entering something. It felt like dropping out of something else. The scale doesn't hit you right away. Your eyes adjust slowly. Shadows shift. And then you start to see the walls. Not close. Not tight, like a normal cave. far away, rising higher than they should. The ceiling disappears into darkness. You keep walking, and the space keeps opening. Hang Son Doong stretches so wide, so tall that you stop thinking of it as a cave. It's not something you move through. It's something you exist inside of. There are sections where a full city block could fit comfortably, where the height reaches what feels like 600 feet or more, but there's nothing to compare it to down there. No buildings, no structures, just rock and space. And then you see the light. Not artificial, not from a flashlight. Real light pouring down from above through openings in the ceiling. They call them dolins, skylights where the roof collapsed long ago, letting the outside world bleed into the underground. That's where everything changes. Because once light gets in, life follows. Trees grow down there. Not small ones, not weak, struggling plants. Full trees, thick trunks, green canopies. An entire jungle living hundreds of feet below the surface. Roots digging into soil that shouldn't exist in a cave. I stood there longer than I expected, looking at leaves moving in a breeze that didn't make sense. Because the air down there doesn't just sit still, it moves. The cave creates its own weather. Warm air from outside meets the cooler air trapped below. It circulates, rises, falls. And in some sections, that movement is enough to form clouds. Real clouds. Hanging inside the cave, drifting slowly under a ceiling of stone. I didn't expect that. You walk through mist that shouldn't be there inside a place that shouldn't support it. And for a second, it feels like the rules have changed. Like you stepped into a system that operates on its own terms. Above you, the sky is just a small opening. Below you, something much bigger is happening. But not all of it feels calm. Deeper in past, the sections where light reaches the cave shifts again. The jungle disappears. The air cools further. The ground becomes harder, rougher. And eventually you reach something that doesn't look like part of the same place. A wall. Not built, not placed. Grown. They call it the Great Wall of Vietnam. A massive calcite formation rising up out of the cave floor. Smooth in some places, jagged in others. Nearly 200 feet high, and for years it stopped people. Explorers came in, reached this point, and had nowhere else to go. You can see why. It's not something you climb casually. The surface doesn't give you much. No clear path, no easy holds. Just a vertical barrier that feels like it was placed there on purpose, even though it wasn't. I remember looking up at it and thinking how strange it is that after everything else, this cave allows. This is where it says no. At least for a while. Eventually, people found a way over, with ropes, equipment, planning, the kind of effort that turns curiosity into something more serious. And beyond it, the cave continues. Larger, deeper, still unfolding. That's the part that stayed with me. This place wasn't discovered because someone was searching for it. It was found by accident. And even after that, it took years before anyone understood what it really was. A system so big, it makes its own climate. A space where light creates life underground. A barrier that held explorers back until they were ready to push further. I sat for a while near one of the skylights before heading out, watching the way the light moved as the day shifted above, listening to water drip somewhere in the distance, feeling that slow, steady air moving past me. And I kept thinking about how easy it would have been for this place to stay hidden. One man walks away in the rain, and an entire world waits beneath his feet. We like to believe we've mapped everything, that the unknown is shrinking, that there aren't many places left where something this large can exist without being seen. But standing there deep under the ground, looking at trees growing in a place that should be empty, it's hard to hold on to that belief, because sometimes the biggest things aren't hidden far away. They're hidden right under where we stand, and we just haven't stepped in yet. You hear it before you understand it. A low hiss somewhere out across the open ground, like steam escaping from something you can't see yet. Then the smell hits. Sharp, sour. Not quite sulfur, but close enough that your throat tightens a little when you breathe it in. And then the color shows up. Not soft, not natural in the way you expect from a landscape. Bright bands of blue and green and orange spread out in front of you like someone painted the earth and forgot to blend it. Grand prismatic spring. Beautiful in a way that makes you stop walking without thinking. People stand there quietly, phones out, cameras steady. It looks calm from a distance, almost peaceful, but nothing about it is calm. That water isn't just hot, it's near boiling, loaded with minerals, acidic enough that if something falls in, it doesn't stay the same for long. Not in the way we like to think about nature. No clean endings, no quick disappearance. It breaks things down, slowly, completely. I remember leaning on the railing, watching the surface move just enough to remind you it's alive underneath. Steam rolling up in waves, shifting with the wind. And for a second, I had this strange thought. If you didn't know what this was, if you just walked into it, there wouldn't be much left to find. That's the conflict of this place. It looks like something you'd put on a postcard. It behaves like something you should stay far away from. And all of it is sitting on top of something much bigger. Yellowstone isn't just a park. It's a system. A network of heat and pressure that starts miles below where you're standing. Roughly 40 miles down, there's a massive body of magma. Not a lake you can picture easily, but a reservoir of molten rock and gas, shifting slowly, building pressure over time. That heat doesn't stay down there. It moves through cracks, through channels, through a kind of underground plumbing system that feeds everything you see on the surface. The springs, the geysers. The constant release of steam. It's all connected. Old Faithful is the part people understand best. You wait, you watch, and then it erupts. Water shoots into the air, predictable, reliable, almost comforting in the way it repeats itself. But it's not magic, it's pressure. Water seeps down into the ground, gets heated by the magma below, and turns into steam. But the path back up isn't open. It's restricted, narrow, twisted. So the pressure builds. More heat, more steam, until it finds a way out. That's when it erupts. Then it resets, like a pressure cooker with a lid that doesn't seal perfectly. It lets off just enough to keep the whole thing from blowing apart. And that's what most of Yellowstone is doing. Venting, releasing pressure in small, controlled ways. Thousands of little escape valves spread across the landscape. Each one preventing something much larger from happening, most of the time. I stood there watching Old Faithful go off, people clapping like it was a show. Kids pointing, adults smiling. And I couldn't shake the thought that what we were really watching wasn't a performance. It was a system staying in balance. Barely. Because if that balance shifts even a little, the scale changes. There's no clean way to say it, but the worst case isn't subtle. If the pressure builds faster than it can be released, if the pathways clog or shift, if enough heat accumulates in one place, the lid doesn't hold. A supervolcanic eruption isn't like the ones you see in movies. There's no single explosion you can point to and say that was it. It's a chain of events. Pressure rising, ground deforming, gas escaping in new places, and then a release that changes everything around it. Ash wouldn't just fall nearby, it would spread. Across states, across the Midwest. Fields that produce food would be covered, not inches, potentially feet in some areas. Crops fail, water systems get contaminated, air becomes something you can't breathe safely without protection. And it wouldn't clear in a day or a week. It lingers. The temperature drops as sunlight gets blocked. Seasons shift. Not permanently, but long enough to matter. Long enough to change how things grow, how people live, how systems hold together. No drama, no exaggeration. Just the geological forecast of what happens when something this large releases all at once. But standing there, none of that is visible. You see steam, color, movement that feels controlled, predictable, manageable. And that's the strange part. We walk through this place like it's stable, like it's always been this way and always will be. We build trails, set up viewing areas, turn it into something you can visit on a weekend. And in a sense, it is stable, right now. Because the system is working. The pressure is being released. The pathways are open. The balance is holding. I walked away from the spring and onto one of the wooden paths that cut through the geothermal area. The ground on either side looks solid, but you know it isn't. Just a thin crust in some places. Heat moving underneath. Water shifting through channels you can't see. And it changes the way you step. Careful. A little slower. More aware of what's under you. That's what Yellowstone does. It doesn't just show you something impressive. It reminds you what you're standing on. Not a fixed surface. Not something permanent. But a layer. Thin in some places, active in ways you don't notice until you stop and think about it. The wind hits you first, not a steady breeze, a sudden push that makes you shift your weight without thinking. You look down out of instinct, and your stomach tightens before your mind can catch up. There's no ground in the way you expect it, just air, a drop that doesn't give you a clear bottom. The canyon stretches so far below that distance stops making sense. 800, 1,000, nearly 2,000 feet down. The kind of height where your eyes can't judge it properly, so your body just assumes the worst. And right across that gap, there's a line of steel. Thin, straight, quiet. Cars move across it like it's nothing, like it's just another road. No hesitation. No sense of what's underneath. That's the strange part. Because standing there, the first question isn't how it works. It's how anyone even started. The Beipanjiang Bridge wasn't built over flat land. There's no easy access down there. No stable base where you can set up equipment. No place for cranes to stand and reach upward. If you tried to build it the way we normally build things, you'd fail before you even began. The canyon doesn't allow it. I remember looking at the edges on both sides, sheer rock walls dropping almost straight down. No gradual slope, no forgiving terrain. Just a cut through the earth so deep it feels like it split the landscape apart. So the problem wasn't just building a bridge, it was getting to the point where building was even possible. They couldn't start from the bottom. That option didn't exist, so they did the only thing left. They started from both sides, two separate teams, two separate ends of the canyon, working toward each other without ever meeting until the very end. Every cable, every section of steel, every connection had to be measured and aligned with something that wasn't physically there yet. Just coordinates, calculations, trust. Because when you're spanning a gap like that, even a small error doesn't stay small. A few millimeters off at one end becomes something much larger in the middle, enough to prevent the two sides from connecting at all. That's the kind of pressure you don't see when you drive across it. But it's there. I tried to picture the moment when the two sides finally met. Steel approaching steel over a void that doesn't forgive mistakes. Workers standing there knowing that everything up to that point comes down to this one alignment. No room to adjust once it's in place. It either fits or it doesn't. And somehow it did. But getting the structure in place was only part of it, because the mountain doesn't stop once the bridge is built. The wind up there isn't gentle. It doesn't flow smoothly the way it does across open plains. It funnels through the canyon, accelerates, changes direction without warning, hits the structure from angles you can't always predict. Steel is strong, but it's not rigid in the way people think. If you force it to resist everything it eventually gives. Not all at once, but through stress, fatigue, the kind that builds over time until something snaps. So they didn't try to make it resist the wind. They let it move. The bridge is designed to breathe. That's the simplest way to think about it. It flexes slightly under pressure. Not enough for you to feel it as you drive, but enough to absorb the force instead of fighting it. Cables tighten and relax. The deck shifts just enough to stay balanced. The entire structure responds to the environment instead of standing against it. I stood there watching the cables. They look solid, permanent. But if you focus long enough, you can see the subtle movement, a slight tension, a response to something you can't fully see, but can definitely feel. That's what keeps it standing, not just strength, adaptation. And then there's the question most people ask when they hear about it. Why? Why spend that kind of money, around $150 million, for a single bridge in a place most people don't even visit? The answer isn't in the structure. It's in what came before it. Driving through those mountains used to take hours, not just because of distance, because of the terrain. Roads winding along cliffs, sharp turns, slow climbs, the kind of driving that wears you down even if nothing goes wrong. 4 hours to get from one side to the other. That's what it used to cost. And in a place like that, time isn't just convenience, it's access. It's whether goods arrive when they're needed, whether people can reach hospitals, whether communities stay connected or slowly drift apart because the journey becomes too much. The bridge cuts that time down to minutes. Not by making things faster in a simple way, but by removing the obstacle entirely. I thought about that as I watched cars move across it. No one slowing down. No one pulling over to take in the view the way I was. To them, it's just part of the road now. Something normal. That's what success looks like in engineering, when something that should feel impossible becomes invisible. You don't think about the canyon anymore. You just cross it. But standing there feeling the wind push against you, looking down into a space that still feels untouched, it's hard to ignore what's really there. The gap didn't go away. The danger didn't disappear. We just found a way over it. And maybe that's the part that stays with you. We don't eliminate obstacles. We work around them, over them, through them, sometimes with brute force, sometimes with precision. But the best solutions are the ones that understand the environment well enough to move with it instead of against it. You notice the height before anything else, not because someone tells you, because your neck starts to ache from looking up. Stone towers rising straight out of the ground, narrow at the base, wider as they climb, like something pushed them upward from below and then forgot to smooth them out. And on top of those pillars there are buildings, not small ones, monasteries, walls, roofs, structures that don't belong at that height, balanced on rock that doesn't look like it should hold them. At first it feels like a trick of perspective. Then you keep staring, and it doesn't change. I remember thinking the same thing over and over. How did anything get up there? Not people. That's one problem. But stone, wood, food, water, everything you need to live. There are no roads leading up, no gentle paths carved into the side, just vertical sandstone rising around 1,200 feet in some places with surfaces worn smooth by time. Today, there are steps, carved stairways, rails, things that make the climb difficult but possible. You can take your time, catch your breath, look out across the valley, and convince yourself it's just another hike. But that's not how it started. The first men who came here weren't building anything. They were leaving noise, leaving conflict, leaving the kind of life that keeps pulling you in different directions until you don't recognize it anymore. They climbed because there was nowhere else left to go that felt far enough away. No equipment, no harnesses, just hands and feet, and the willingness to keep moving upward even when the rock gave you almost nothing to hold. I tried a small section near the base, not high, not dangerous in any real sense. And even that was enough to remind me how quickly your body gives up when there's no margin for error. Your fingers search for something that isn't there. Your shoes slip just enough to make you hesitate. And these men kept going, up and up, finding small ledges, tiny pockets in the rock. Places where they could stop long enough to breathe before continuing. Until eventually, they reached the top. That's where the real work began. Because once you're up there, the isolation doesn't feed you. It doesn't build shelter. It doesn't carry materials. It just keeps you separated from everything else. So they had to solve a different problem, getting things up. For centuries, there were no permanent stairs, no carved paths that connected the ground to those monasteries. The only way in or out was by rope, not a ladder the way we think of it. A net, thick rope woven into something you could stand in barely, supplies placed inside, people sometimes climbing in themselves, and then slowly, carefully, it would be pulled up from above. I stood at the base, looking up at one of those systems. Even the modern versions look fragile when you compare them to the height they have to cover. The rope disappears into the sky. You can't see where it ends. Only trust that someone up there is controlling it. Back then, that trust was absolute. There's a story they tell about how often the ropes were replaced. You'd expect a schedule, maintenance, something predictable. But that's not what they did. They replaced the rope when it broke. Not before, when it failed. They believed if it held, it was meant to hold. And when it didn't, that was something beyond them deciding it was time. I don't know if that's faith or acceptance, maybe both, but imagine living like that. Every trip up or down carried by something that could give way at any moment, and choosing to accept that risk as part of the life you've committed to. It changes how you think about control. And then there's the reason all of this made sense in the first place. Defense. Down in the valley, armies could move. Roads could be followed. Settlements could be reached and taken. But up here, once the ladders were pulled up, once the ropes were secured, there was no way to reach them. You could stand at the base with 100 men and still have no path forward. No siege equipment could easily reach that height. No simple way to climb without being exposed the entire time. It turned the monastery into something more than a place of worship. It became untouchable. I walked up the modern steps eventually. Slow, taking breaks, feeling the distance in my legs. And even with all the improvements, it still demands something from you. Effort, patience, a willingness to keep going when it would be easier to stop. When I reached the top, the view stretched out farther than I expected. The valley below looked calm, almost peaceful. The same place that once pushed people to climb away from it. And that's when it settled in. They didn't build up there because it was convenient. They built there because it was the only place that gave them what they needed. Safety, silence, distance. And they accepted everything that came with it. The risk, the effort, the isolation. We spend most of our lives trying to make things easier, shorter, more efficient. But standing on top of those pillars, looking at a world that feels far away, even though it's right below you, it's hard not to wonder if sometimes the harder path is the one that gives you exactly what you were looking for. There's a moment, usually at the end of a long day, when everything you've seen starts to line up in a way you didn't expect. Not perfectly, not clean, but enough that the pieces stop feeling random. I had that moment sitting still for the first time in hours. No noise around me, just the memory of places that didn't make sense on their own. A train running through someone's kitchen, a silent machine listening to the edge of the universe. A fire that's been burning longer than most lives. A village that didn't fall but simply faded away. A jungle growing where sunlight barely reaches. A volcano that breathes under your feet without asking permission. A bridge stretched across empty space. Monasteries balanced on stone that shouldn't hold them. Individually, each one feels like an exception. Together, they start to look like a pattern. We don't go to these places because they're easy. We go because they aren't. That's the thread running through all of it. Different countries, different centuries, different reasons on the surface, but underneath it's the same instinct. Take something that resists you and figure out how to live with it anyway. A monk climbs a pillar of rock not because it's logical, but because it gives him distance from a world he no longer trusts. An engineer cuts a train line through a building not because it looks impressive, but because the mountain left no other choice. Someone lights a crater on fire, thinking it will solve a problem, only to discover that some forces don't respond the way you expect. A family leaves a village not because they've grown weak, but because the world moved forward and the mountain stayed still. None of it is clean, none of it is perfect, but all of it is human. We like to tell stories about conquering nature, about bending it, shaping it, turning impossible places into something useful. And in some ways that's true. Bridges get built, roads appear, Systems come together that let us cross distances we couldn't before. But there's another side to it. Nature doesn't lose. It waits. Gam Sutul is still standing. The stones are there. The walls haven't disappeared. But the life inside it is gone. Slowly reclaimed not by force, but by time. Wind. Silence. The simple fact that nothing stays active forever. The crater in the desert is still burning. Not because we control it, but because we don't. It's a reminder that one decision made quickly can outlast the people who made it. Yellowstone vents its pressure day after day, quietly balancing something much larger underneath. Not conquered, managed, for now. Even the strongest structures, the most precise designs, the places that feel permanent, they exist inside a system that doesn't care how much effort went into building them. That's not a negative thought. It's just honest. I used to think these places were about pushing limits, about showing what's possible when you have enough skill, enough determination, enough resources to overcome whatever stands in your way. And part of that is still true. But standing in those places one after another, something shifted. It's not just about overcoming, it's about understanding. The people who built on those cliffs, who carved paths into mountains, who stretched steel across empty space, they weren't ignoring the environment. They were listening to it, finding the one place where it gives just enough to let you exist there. Not dominate. Exist. That's a quieter kind of strength. Less about control, more about adaptation. And maybe that's the realization that sticks. We don't build in impossible places because we expect them to stay that way forever. We build there because the challenge forces us to become something more precise, more patient, more aware of what we're working with. It defines us, but it doesn't belong to us. I thought about that as everything started to fade back into normal life. Roads that feel flat, buildings that feel stable, noise that fills every space without you noticing it anymore. It's easy to forget what's underneath all of that. How thin the layer is between what we've built and what's always been there. But once you've seen it, really seen it, it doesn't leave you. It changes the way you look at things, at the ground beneath your feet, at the structures you trust without thinking, at the idea that anything we make is permanent. Because it isn't. And maybe that's what gives it meaning. The effort, the risk, the decision to build anyway, knowing that time will eventually take it back. Not as failure, just as part of the cycle. I sat there a little longer than I needed to, letting that settle in, not trying to turn it into something bigger than it was, just accepting it. The world is vast, and our time is short. See you on the next adventure.